Marcus Thompson had been home from Afghanistan for exactly 18 months, but his body still moved like he was walking through a minefield. Every shadow caught his attention. Every unexpected sound made his muscles tense, and every instinct he'd developed during 3 tours of duty remained as sharp as the day he'd left Kandahar. The small suburban neighborhood in Ohio where he now lived, with his wife Sarah and their 8-year-old daughter, Emma felt worlds away from the desert compounds and mountain passes where he'd spent the better part of 5 years. Yet his mind refused to fully accept the peace. On this particular Tuesday evening in late September, Marcus was returning from his job at the local hardware store where he'd been working since his discharge. The familiar weight of his truck keys in his hand and the sound of gravel crunching under his boots should have been comforting, but something felt wrong. The feeling started as a low hum in his chest, the same sensation he'd learned to trust when approaching potentially hostile territory overseas. His eyes swept the street automatically, cataloging details that most people would never notice. Mrs. Henderson's porch light was on, same as always. The Johnson family's minivan sat in their driveway with one tire that needed air, just like yesterday. But there were subtle differences that made his skin crawl. The front door of his own house was slightly ajar when Sarah always kept it locked until he came home. The living room curtains were drawn completely shut, when Sarah preferred them partially open to let in the afternoon light. Most telling of all, Emma's bicycle lay abandoned on the front lawn instead of being properly stored in the garage as he'd taught her. Marcus killed the engine and sat in his truck for 30 seconds, letting his trained awareness take over completely. During his time in the military, this heightened state of alertness had kept him and his squad alive through countless dangerous situations. The ability to read an environment, to sense when something was off, had become as natural as breathing. Right now, every instinct he possessed was screaming that his family was in danger. He reached under his seat and retrieved the Glock 19 he kept there, checking the magazine out of habit before securing it in his waistband. Moving with the silent precision that had made him an exemplary soldier, Marcus approached his house from the side yard rather than walking directly up the front path. His combat boots made no sound on the grass as he moved from shadow to shadow, using the large oak tree and his neighbor's fence as cover. Through the kitchen window, he could see into the living room where his worst fears were confirmed. 3 men in dark clothing stood in his home, and one of them was clearly holding a weapon. Sarah sat on the couch with Emma pressed close against her side, both of them looking terrified but unharmed. The man nearest to them was gesturing aggressively while speaking, though Marcus couldn't make out the words through the glass. The second intruder was rifling through drawers in the kitchen, clearly searching for something specific. The third man stood near the front door, apparently acting as a lookout. Marcus felt the familiar surge of controlled adrenaline that had carried him through firefights and rescue missions. His breathing became deep and measured, his vision sharpened, and his mind shifted into the tactical mode that had been drilled into him through years of training. These men had made the mistake of threatening his family, and that was something he simply could not allow. Moving to the back of the house, Marcus used his key to quietly unlock the rear door that led into the mudroom. The hinges had been squeaking for weeks, something he'd been meaning to fix. But now he was grateful for Sarah's constant reminders, because he knew exactly how to lift and ease the door open without making a sound. Once inside, he could hear voices more clearly. "We know he has it," one of the men was saying in accented English. "The information we received was very specific. Your husband took something from the base that doesn't belong to him and we need it back." Sarah's voice was shaky but defiant. "I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus never brought anything home from the military except his personal belongings." "Perhaps your memory needs some encouragement," the man replied. And Marcus heard Emma whimper. That sound, his daughter's fear, ignited something primal in Marcus. He moved through the mudroom into the kitchen, staying low and using the island counter as cover. The man searching through drawers had his back turned, completely focused on his task and unaware that he was no longer alone in the room. Marcus could see that the intruder had a pistol tucked into his belt, but it wasn't in his hand. Years of close-quarters combat training took over as Marcus closed the distance in 3 silent steps. His left arm snaked around the man's throat while his right hand secured the weapon, applying pressure to the carotid artery in a sleeper hold that would render the intruder unconscious within seconds. The man struggled briefly before going limp, and Marcus lowered him quietly to the floor, securing his hands with zip ties from his work belt. One down, two to go. Marcus checked the man's pockets and found a cell phone, 2 additional magazines, and a small radio. He pocketed the radio and destroyed the phone by removing the battery. The fact that these men were organized and well-equipped told him this wasn't a random home invasion. Someone had specifically targeted his family, and they seemed to believe he possessed something valuable. From his position in the kitchen, Marcus could see the lookout near the front door and had a partial view of the man threatening his family. He needed to move carefully now, because any mistake could result in Sarah or Emma being hurt. The tactical advantage he'd gained by taking out one intruder would be lost if he acted rashly. The man in the living room was still talking, his voice becoming more agitated. Your husband was involved in an operation in Afghanistan that resulted in the acquisition of certain materials. We have reason to believe he kept some of those materials when he shouldn't have. We're not here to hurt anyone, but we will do whatever is necessary to recover what belongs to us. Marcus racked his brain, trying to think of what they could possibly be referring to. His final mission in Afghanistan had been a routine patrol that had gone sideways when they discovered a weapons cache in an abandoned compound. Everything had been turned over to command according to protocol. He'd brought home nothing but his personal gear and a few souvenirs that had been cleared through proper channels. But clearly, someone believed otherwise, and they were willing to threaten his family to get whatever they thought he had. Marcus checked his watch and began formulating a plan. He needed to disable the lookout next, then deal with the final intruder without putting Sarah and Emma at risk. The element of surprise was still on his side, but it wouldn't last much longer. The radio Marcus had taken from the unconscious intruder crackled softly in his pocket, and he quickly turned down the volume. Through the static, he heard someone speaking in what sounded like Russian, confirming his suspicion that this was more than just a random break-in. These men were professionals, possibly foreign operatives, and they had come prepared for resistance. Marcus studied the layout of his living room from his concealed position in the kitchen. The lookout by the front door was positioned where he could see both the street and the living room, but his attention seemed focused outward, watching for any approaching vehicles or neighbors who might interfere. The man threatening his family stood about 8 feet from the couch where Sarah and Emma sat huddled together, close enough to reach them quickly but far enough away that Marcus couldn't take him down without crossing open ground. Sarah caught sight of Marcus through the kitchen doorway, and for just a moment her eyes widened with relief and hope, but she was smart enough not to react obviously, instead maintaining her frightened expression while subtly shifting her position to shield Emma from the intruder's view. That small movement told Marcus that his wife was ready to act when the moment came, and he felt a surge of pride in her composure under pressure. The man interrogating Sarah was becoming increasingly frustrated with her responses. Mrs. Thompson, your husband's unit discovered something very valuable during their final operation in Afghanistan. Intelligence documents that were never supposed to leave that compound. We know he took them and we know he brought them home. The only question is whether you're going to cooperate willingly, or if we need to provide additional motivation. Marcus frowned as he tried to remember every detail of that last mission. They had indeed found documents during the raid on the compound, but everything had been turned over to intelligence officers for analysis. He had never even seen what was in those papers, let alone taken copies. Either these men had been given false information, or there was something about that mission that he didn't fully understand. I'm telling you the truth, Sarah said, her voice stronger now despite her obvious fear. Marcus never brought any documents home. He followed all the rules about classified materials. You're making a mistake. The intruder stepped closer to her and Marcus saw his hand move toward the weapon at his side. Perhaps your daughter would be more helpful in encouraging your memory. That was enough. Marcus couldn't wait any longer. Moving with the fluid precision of someone who had spent years in combat situations, Marcus left the kitchen and approached the lookout from behind. The man was focused on the window, watching the street for any signs of trouble, completely unaware that the real threat was already inside the house. Marcus closed the distance in 4 quick steps, wrapping his arm around the man's throat and applying pressure to the carotid artery, while simultaneously disarming him. This intruder was better trained than the first one and struggled more effectively, but Marcus had the advantage of surprise and superior positioning. Within 15 seconds, the lookout was unconscious, and Marcus had secured his weapon and radio. He zip-tied the man's hands and dragged him into the front hallway where he would be out of sight. 2 down, one to go. But the situation was about to become much more dangerous. The remaining intruders still had Sarah and Emma within arm's reach, and Marcus knew that any direct confrontation could result in his family being hurt. He needed a different approach, something that would draw the man away from the couch without alerting him to the fact that his companions had been neutralized. Marcus picked up the radio he'd taken from the lookout and keyed the microphone, speaking in the broken Russian he'd learned during his deployment. "Problem outside," he said in heavily accented English, hoping to sound like one of the intruders reporting an issue. "Need help with neighbor." The effect was immediate. The man in the living room stepped away from Sarah and Emma, moving toward the front door to investigate. "Victor, what kind of problem?" he called out in English, clearly trying to communicate with his missing lookout. When no response came, the intruder grew suspicious and drew his weapon, moving more cautiously toward the hallway. This was the opportunity Marcus had been waiting for. With the man's back turned and his attention focused on the front of the house, Marcus emerged from the kitchen and moved silently across the living room. Sarah saw him coming and acted without hesitation. She suddenly stood up from the couch, pretending to be panicked and stumbling toward the intruder. "Please don't hurt us," she cried out, deliberately creating a distraction that drew the man's attention back toward her. The intruder spun around, raising his weapon toward Sarah, but Marcus was already in motion. Years of hand-to-hand combat training took over as he closed the final distance between them. His left hand deflected the gun away from his family, while his right delivered a precise strike to the man's wrist, causing him to drop the weapon. A follow-up elbow to the solar plexus doubled the intruder over, and Marcus finished the confrontation with a sleeper hold that rendered the man unconscious within seconds. Emma ran to her father as soon as the threat was neutralized, throwing her arms around his waist and burying her face against his chest. Sarah followed close behind, and for a moment the three of them stood together in their living room, holding each other while the adrenaline slowly began to fade. "Are you both okay?" Marcus asked, checking Sarah and Emma for any signs of injury. "Did they hurt you at all?" "We're fine," Sarah assured him, though her hands were still shaking. "They just kept asking about documents from Afghanistan. They seemed to think you had taken something classified from your last mission." Marcus shook his head, still puzzled by the accusation. "I never took anything. Everything was turned over to Intel according to protocol. Either someone gave them bad information or there's something about that mission I don't know." He quickly secured the third intruder with zip ties and began searching through the men's belongings, looking for clues about who had sent them and why they believed he possessed classified documents. Each of the intruders carried false identification documents, but they were high-quality forgeries that suggested professional backing. They also had identical cell phones with encrypted communication apps and enough cash to support an extended operation. "We need to call the police," Sarah said, but Marcus hesitated. "These aren't ordinary criminals," he replied, studying a piece of paper he'd found in one of the men's pockets. It contained his home address, his work schedule, and Emma's school information. "They've been watching us for a while, and they have professional support. If we call local police, there's no guarantee that whoever sent these men won't just send more." The paper also contained a phone number and a reference to something called Operation Sandstorm, which Marcus didn't recognize. But the fact that these men had such detailed information about his family's routine meant that the threat might be ongoing. He needed to understand what they were really after before deciding on the best course of action. "Then what do we do?" Sarah asked, looking around their violated home with obvious distress. Marcus pulled out his cell phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for his former commanding officer, Colonel Harrison. If there was something about his final mission in Afghanistan that he didn't know about, Harrison would have answers. And if these men were part of a larger operation, targeting former military personnel, the colonel needed to know about it. "I'm going to make some calls," Marcus said, keeping his voice calm despite the urgency he felt. "We need to find out what this is really about before we make any decisions." Colonel Harrison answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone that Marcus remembered from their days in Afghanistan. "Thompson, what's your situation?" "Sir, I have 3 unconscious foreign operatives zip-tied in my living room, and they were asking my family about classified documents from Operation Sandstorm. The problem is I've never heard of Operation Sandstorm, and I didn't take any documents from Afghanistan." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Marcus could hear papers rustling in the background. When Harrison spoke again, his voice was tense. "Marcus, I need you to listen very carefully. Do not contact local law enforcement. Do not let those men wake up before I get there. And whatever you do, do not let them communicate with anyone outside your house." "Sir, what's going on? What is Operation Sandstorm?" "It's classified above your clearance level. But since your family is in immediate danger, I'm going to tell you what you need to know. During your final mission in Afghanistan, your unit discovered more than just a weapons cache. You found intelligence documents that detailed a network of foreign agents operating inside the United States. The operation to analyze and act on that intelligence was codenamed Sandstorm." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. "But sir, we turned everything over to intelligence. I never even saw what was in those documents." "That's correct, but someone leaked information suggesting that copies of those documents were kept by members of your unit. The leak was false, designed to draw out the very people who are now in your house. You and your family have been used as bait, Marcus, and I should have warned you sooner." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. His family had been deliberately put in danger as part of some larger intelligence operation, and he hadn't even known about it. "How long have you known this was a possibility?" 3 weeks. We've been tracking chatter about potential moves against your unit members, but we thought we had more time to set up proper protection. I'm 20 minutes out from your location with a tactical team."
"Can you hold the situation until then?"
Marcus looked around his living room at the 3 unconscious men and at his wife and daughter, who were watching him with worried expressions. 20 minutes felt like an eternity when dealing with trained operatives who might have backup on the way. "I can hold them. But what if they have more people coming? These guys had radios and were communicating with someone. That's a real possibility. I need you to gather your family and move to the most defensible position in your house. Do you have any weapons besides your sidearm?" "I have a shotgun in the bedroom closet and my old rifle in the basement gun safe." "Get them both and take your family to wherever you have the best fields of fire and the strongest walls. And Marcus, if more hostiles show up before we arrive, don't hesitate to defend your family. The people who sent these men won't stop until they believe the threat to their network has been eliminated." Marcus ended the call and turned to Sarah and Emma, who had been listening to his side of the conversation with growing alarm. He knelt down to Emma's level and took her small hands in his. "Sweetheart, remember when we practiced our emergency drills? Well, we need to do one of those drills right now, except this time it's real. I need you to be very brave and do exactly what Mommy and I tell you, okay?" Emma nodded solemnly, her 8-year-old mind processing the seriousness of the situation even if she didn't fully understand the details. "Are the bad men going to hurt us, Daddy?" "Not if I can help it," Marcus promised, then stood and addressed Sarah. "We need to move to the basement. It has concrete walls, only one entrance, and good sight lines. Can you grab the emergency bag while I get the weapons?" Sarah had already anticipated his request and was pulling their pre-packed emergency bag from the hall closet. Like many military families, they had prepared for various contingencies, though Marcus had never imagined they would actually need to use their emergency protocols in their own home in Ohio. Marcus quickly retrieved his Remington 870 shotgun from the bedroom closet and his AR-15 rifle from the basement gun safe, along with all available ammunition. The familiar weight of the weapons in his hands brought back memories of countless missions overseas. But this time, he was fighting to protect his own family and his own home. As they were preparing to move to the basement, Marcus heard the distinctive sound of vehicle doors closing outside. He moved to the front window and peered through the curtains, his heart sinking at what he saw. A black SUV had parked across the street and he could see at least 2 figures inside. Another vehicle, a dark sedan, was approaching from the opposite direction. "Sarah, take Emma downstairs now," Marcus ordered, his voice taking on the commanding tone he'd used with his squad in combat situations. "Set up in the far corner behind the workbench. If anyone comes down those stairs who isn't me or Colonel Harrison, you know what to do." Sarah had also received basic firearms training as a military spouse, and she understood the gravity of the situation. She gathered Emma and their emergency supplies and headed for the basement stairs, moving quickly but quietly. Marcus took a position near the front window where he could observe the approaching vehicles while remaining concealed. The occupants of both cars were clearly professionals, moving with the same tactical awareness he'd observed in the 3 men already in his house. They were dressed in civilian clothing but carried themselves like soldiers or operatives. One of the men from the SUV was speaking into a radio, presumably trying to contact the team inside the house. When he received no response, the group began moving toward the house with obvious caution. Marcus counted at least 5 additional hostiles, all armed, all moving with military precision. His phone buzzed with a text message from Colonel Harrison. Delayed by traffic. ETA 15 minutes. Hang tight, 15 minutes. Marcus had to keep 5 trained operatives away from his family for 15 more minutes, while also keeping watch over 3 unconscious prisoners. The odds weren't favorable, but he'd faced worse situations in Afghanistan and survived through careful planning and superior positioning. Marcus quickly moved through the house, turning off all the lights and closing all the curtains to deny the approaching team any visual intelligence about what was happening inside. He then moved the 3 unconscious intruders to the basement, securing them in a storage room where they couldn't interfere with his defense of his family. The backup team is here, he told Sarah quietly as he positioned himself at the bottom of the basement stairs with his rifle. 5 more hostiles, maybe more. Harrison is 15 minutes out. Sarah had set up a defensive position behind his workbench with Emma crouched safely behind her. She had his pistol in her hands and a determined expression on her face that reminded Marcus why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. "We've been through worse," Sarah said softly, though they both knew that wasn't quite true. They'd never faced a direct threat to their family before, and the stakes had never been higher. Above them, Marcus heard the sound of his front door being forced open. The real battle was about to begin. The sound of multiple footsteps moving through his house sent adrenaline coursing through Marcus's system. He could track the intruders' movements by the creaking of floorboards and the subtle sounds of tactical gear brushing against furniture. These men were more cautious than the first team, clearly aware that their advance group had encountered resistance. From his position at the bottom of the basement stairs, Marcus had an excellent defensive advantage. The narrow stairway created a natural choke point that would force any attackers to approach single file, and the concrete walls provided solid cover against small arms fire. He had positioned himself where he could see the top of the stairs while remaining concealed behind a concrete support pillar. Above him, he heard voices speaking in Russian, confirming his suspicion that this was a coordinated foreign operation. The tone was urgent but professional, suggesting these men were experienced operators who were adapting to the unexpected resistance they'd encountered. Marcus caught fragments of the conversation, enough to understand that they were discussing how to breach the basement while minimizing their own casualties. Sarah caught his attention with a slight gesture, pointing toward the small basement windows near the ceiling. Marcus realized she was right to be concerned. While the main stairway was the most obvious approach, a determined team might try to breach through the windows or find another way into the basement. He needed to account for multiple possible attack vectors. "Watch the windows," he whispered to Sarah, who adjusted her position to cover that potential threat while still shielding Emma behind the workbench. The waiting was the hardest part. Marcus had learned during his military service that the anticipation of combat was often more stressful than the actual fighting, and right now, every second stretched like an hour as he listened to the movements above and waited for the attack he knew was coming. His phone buzzed with another text from Colonel Harrison. "Satellite imagery shows 5 hostiles in house, 2 more in vehicles outside. Military police units moving to secure perimeter. Hold position." Knowing that backup was on the way provided some comfort, but Marcus also understood that the operatives upstairs would likely attempt their assault before military personnel could arrive. These men had come too far and risked too much to simply retreat without accomplishing their mission. The attack began with a flashbang grenade thrown down the basement stairs. Marcus had anticipated this possibility and had already positioned himself with his back to the stairs, covering his ears and closing his eyes as the device detonated. The blast was deafening in the confined space, but his preparation allowed him to maintain his composure and fighting effectiveness. As the echo of the explosion faded, Marcus heard the rapid footsteps of someone descending the stairs. He spun around and engaged the first hostile with a controlled burst from his rifle, dropping the man immediately. The narrow confines of the stairway worked exactly as he'd hoped, preventing the attackers from using their numerical superiority effectively. The second attacker appeared almost immediately, but this one was more cautious. using the walls of the stairway for cover while advancing. Marcus adjusted his position to maintain his field of fire while staying behind the concrete pillar that protected him from return fire. The brief firefight was intense but decisive, with Marcus's superior positioning and knowledge of the terrain giving him a crucial advantage. Above him, he could hear the remaining operatives regrouping and discussing alternative approaches. They had learned that a direct assault down the stairs was too costly, and they were now considering other options. Marcus used this brief respite to check on Sarah and Emma, both of whom had handled the sounds of gunfire with remarkable composure. 2 down, he reported quietly. 3 still upstairs, plus however many are outside. Emma was pressing her hands over her ears, but she wasn't crying or panicking. Sarah had done an excellent job of keeping her calm and focused during the crisis. Marcus felt a surge of pride in both of them for their courage under such extreme circumstances. The next phase of the attack came from an unexpected direction. One of the basement windows suddenly shattered as someone outside began breaking through with a tool. Marcus had anticipated this possibility and was ready when the first hostile attempted to squeeze through the narrow opening. A single shot from his rifle ended that threat before the man could fully enter the basement. However, the window breach had been a diversion. While Marcus was focused on that threat, the remaining operatives upstairs had begun a more systematic approach to clearing the basement. They were using the time he spent dealing with the window breach to position themselves for a coordinated assault from multiple angles. Marcus heard the distinctive sound of rope being deployed and realized that the operatives were preparing to rappel down into the basement from the main floor, bypassing the stairway entirely by breaking through the basement ceiling. This was a sophisticated tactic that required specialized equipment and training, further confirming that he was dealing with elite-level operatives. "They're coming through the ceiling," he warned Sarah, who immediately adjusted her position to cover the area above their heads. The first operative broke through the drywall ceiling near the far end of the basement, rappelling down with professional precision. But Marcus was ready for him, having positioned himself to cover multiple possible breach points. The engagement was brief but violent, with Marcus's combat experience and intimate knowledge of his own basement giving him the edge he needed. As the sound of gunfire echoed through the basement, Marcus heard new voices upstairs, American voices speaking with military authority. Colonel Harrison had arrived with his tactical team, and the remaining operatives found themselves caught between Marcus below and military personnel above. The final operative attempted to escape through the same window where his colleague had been shot, but Marcus was in position to prevent that retreat. The man surrendered when he realized his situation was hopeless, dropping his weapon and raising his hands as sirens began wailing outside the house. Within minutes, the basement was filled with military personnel wearing tactical gear and carrying advanced weapons. Colonel Harrison descended the stairs personally, surveying the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had dealt with similar situations before. "Outstanding work, Thompson," the colonel said, helping Marcus to his feet. "Your family safe?" Marcus nodded toward the workbench where Sarah and Emma were emerging from their defensive position. Emma ran to her father immediately, and he scooped her up in his arms, holding her tightly as the reality of what they'd just survived began to sink in. "The operatives upstairs?" Marcus asked. "Neutralized or captured. We have a total of 8 hostiles in custody, plus the 3 you took down here. This was a substantial operation, and your actions probably prevented a much larger intelligence disaster." Sarah approached them, still carrying the pistol but with obvious relief on her face. "Is it over?" Colonel Harrison nodded gravely. "This phase is over, but we need to debrief thoroughly and make arrangements for your family's security. The people who sent these operatives won't simply give up because this mission failed." Marcus understood the implications immediately. Their lives had been changed forever by forces beyond their control, and there would be consequences to deal with in the days and weeks ahead. But for now, his family was safe, and that was all that mattered. "So we were used as bait without our knowledge," Sarah summarized when he had finished explaining. "Our safety was sacrificed for a larger operation, but that operation was successful in stopping a real threat to the country." "That's essentially correct, and now they're offering us a chance to be part of the solution rather than just victims of the problem." Sarah was quiet for a long time, watching Emma play with toys that the safe house staff had provided. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful, but determined. "What do you want to do, Marcus? Not what you think we should do or what would be best for everyone else, but what do you actually want?" Marcus had been asking himself the same question since leaving the debriefing. "I want our family to be safe and happy. I want Emma to grow up in a world where she doesn't have to worry about threats like this. And I want to feel like I'm making a difference, like my skills and experience are being used for something important." "Then I think we need to seriously consider their offer," Sarah said. "But with conditions. If we're going to do this, we do it as a family, with full knowledge of what we're getting into, and with guarantees about our safety and Emma's future." The next morning brought a new perspective on their situation. Marcus woke early, as was his habit from military service, and found himself standing at the safe house kitchen window, watching the sunrise while drinking coffee. The normalcy of the moment felt surreal after the violence and chaos of the previous day, but it also reminded him of what he was fighting to protect. Sarah joined him a few minutes later, moving quietly to avoid waking Emma. They stood together, in comfortable silence, both processing the magnitude of the changes their lives had undergone in such a short time. The peaceful suburban neighborhood outside the window looked exactly like the one they had left behind, but Marcus knew they could never really go back to the innocence they had lost. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," Sarah said finally, "about wanting to make a difference and use your skills for something important. I think I understand that feeling better now." "How so?" "Yesterday, when those men were in our house threatening Emma, I felt completely helpless. Even with the gun in my hands and the training you'd given me, I knew that without your intervention we would have been at their mercy. I never want to feel that helpless again, and I don't want other families to go through what we experienced." Marcus turned to look at his wife, seeing a resolve in her expression that reminded him of the woman who had supported him through 3 deployments and countless military challenges. "Are you saying you think we should accept their offer?" "I'm saying I think we should hear them out completely before making any decision. But I'm also saying that if we do this, we do it right. No more being kept in the dark. No more being used without our knowledge. If they want our help, they need to treat us as partners, not as assets." Later that morning, Colonel Harrison arrived at the safe house with Agent Martinez and a man who introduced himself as Director Reynolds from the joint task force that was being assembled to deal with similar threats. Emma was playing in the backyard under the watchful eye of 2 guards, giving the adults privacy to discuss the details of the proposed arrangement. "Before we begin," Sarah said, taking charge of the conversation in a way that surprised everyone except Marcus, "I want to establish some ground rules. My family has been traumatized and put at risk without our knowledge or consent. If you want our cooperation going forward, that changes now." Director Reynolds nodded respectfully. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand your concerns and I want to assure you that the mistakes made in this operation will not be repeated. If you and your husband decide to work with us, you'll be full partners with complete transparency about any operations that might affect your family." "What exactly are you asking us to do?" Marcus asked. Agent Martinez opened a briefcase and pulled out several folders containing photographs and documents. "The spy network we've uncovered has tentacles reaching into multiple cities across the United States. We believe there are similar networks operating independently of the one we just neutralized. We need people with your unique combination of military experience and civilian integration to help identify and counter these threats." "You're asking us to become spies ourselves," Sarah observed. "Not exactly," Director Reynolds clarified. "You would be working as consultants and advisors, helping us understand how these networks operate and how to approach them without creating the kind of international incident that could result from more heavy-handed tactics." Marcus studied the photographs in the folders, recognizing the type of operation being described. "You want us to help you identify sleeper agents by understanding how they integrate into American communities. That's part of it. But we also need people who can train other military families to recognize and respond to similar threats. What happened to your family yesterday could happen to any military family whose service member was involved in sensitive operations overseas." The scope of the proposal was larger than Marcus had initially understood. They weren't just being asked to help with one operation, but to become part of a new approach to domestic counterintelligence that recognized the vulnerability of military families to foreign targeting. "Where would we live?" Sarah asked. "Emma needs stability, especially after what she's been through. We can arrange for you to remain in Ohio if you prefer, though your home would need significant security upgrades. Alternatively, we have facilities in Virginia and Colorado that would provide both security and proximity to training centers where you'd be working." Emma's voice carried through the window as she played in the backyard, reminding all of them that any decision they made would affect an innocent child who had already been through more trauma than most adults experience in a lifetime. "I need to ask the hard question," Marcus said. "What happens if we say no? Can we really go back to our old life, or will there always be a target on our backs because of what we know?" Director Reynolds exchanged glances with his colleagues before answering. "The immediate threat has been neutralized, but you're right to be concerned about long-term security. The people who operated that spy network have resources and connections that extend beyond what we've captured. Your involvement in disrupting their operation makes you a person of interest to their remaining associates. So we don't really have a choice," Sarah said, "but without bitterness. We can either accept your offer and have some control over our situation, or we can try to return to civilian life while constantly looking over our shoulders." "That's unfortunately an accurate assessment," Colonel Harrison admitted. "But I want you to know that if you choose to work with us, it won't be a traditional military assignment. You'll have significant input into how operations are conducted, and your family's safety will always be the top priority." Marcus looked at Sarah, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her expression. They had been thrust into a situation not of their choosing, but they could either remain victims of that situation or become active participants in preventing similar threats to other families. "If we agree to this," Sarah said, "I want to be involved in the training programs for military families. I want to help other wives and mothers learn how to protect their children and themselves when their husbands are deployed or when threats like this emerge." "That can absolutely be arranged," Agent Martinez assured her. "In fact, having someone with your experience would be invaluable for developing realistic training scenarios." Marcus made his decision. "We'll do it, but with conditions. Emma's education and psychological support are non-negotiable priorities. Sarah and I work as a team, not as separate assets. And if at any point we determine that this work is having a negative impact on our family, we have the right to withdraw." Director Reynolds stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to the task force, Agent Thompson. We'll begin the transition process immediately, and I think you'll find that this work, while challenging, will give you the sense of purpose and security that your family deserves." As they shook hands, Marcus felt a familiar sense of mission returning. But this time, it was different. This time he wasn't just serving his country, he was protecting his family and helping to ensure that other families wouldn't have to endure what they had experienced. The debriefing took place in a secure facility 30 miles from Marcus's home, in a building that looked like an ordinary office complex, but was actually a military intelligence installation. Sarah and Emma had been taken to a safe house under military protection while Marcus met with Colonel Harrison and a team of intelligence officers who needed to understand exactly what had happened and why. The conference room was sterile and windowless, with maps of Afghanistan covering one wall and photographs of the captured operatives displayed on another. Marcus sat across from 3 officers he'd never met before, all wearing civilian clothes but carrying themselves with unmistakable military bearing. Colonel Harrison sat beside him, serving as both his advocate and his superior officer. "Let's start from the beginning," said Agent Martinez, a woman in her 40s who introduced herself as being with the Defense Intelligence Agency. "Tell us everything you remember about your final mission in Afghanistan, particularly the compound where you discovered the weapons cache." Marcus closed his eyes and transported himself back to that dusty afternoon in Kandahar province, remembering details he hadn't thought about in months. It was supposed to be a routine patrol to investigate reports of Taliban activity in a village about 20 kilometers from our base. When we arrived, the village was deserted, but our intelligence indicated that the Taliban had been using a compound on the outskirts as a staging area. "What did you find in the compound?" asked the second officer, a man who identified himself only as Agent Chen. The main building contained a significant weapons cache, AK-47s, RPGs, ammunition, and what appeared to be components for improvised explosive devices. But there was also a hidden room that we discovered when one of my soldiers noticed that the building's interior dimensions didn't match its exterior measurements. Marcus paused, remembering the moment when they'd broken through the false wall and discovered the hidden chamber. Inside the hidden room, we found a sophisticated communication setup and several boxes of documents. Everything was written in languages I couldn't read. Some looked like Russian, others might have been Arabic or Farsi. Agent Martinez leaned forward, her expression intense. "Did you examine any of those documents personally?" "No, ma'am. Following standard protocol, we secured the area and called for intelligence personnel to handle the documents. Everything was photographed in place, then collected and removed by a team from battalion headquarters. I never saw what was actually written on those papers. But someone believes you did," Colonel Harrison interjected. "The intelligence we've gathered from the captured operatives indicates that their handlers were convinced you had kept copies of specific documents that detailed a network of sleeper agents operating in American cities." The third officer, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "The documents your unit discovered contained the real names, addresses, and operational instructions for over 40 foreign agents who had been living in the United States for years, some for decades. They were part of a deep-cover network designed to conduct sabotage and intelligence-gathering operations if relations between our countries deteriorated." Marcus felt a chill as he understood the implications. "Someone leaked false information suggesting that I had copies of those documents?" "Exactly," Agent Martinez confirmed. "We believe the leak was deliberate, designed to flush out the remaining members of the spy network. By suggesting that their identities had been compromised and that a former soldier had the evidence, we hoped to force them into taking action that would reveal themselves." "You used my family as bait," Marcus said, his voice carrying an edge of anger that he was struggling to control. Colonel Harrison placed a hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, I want you to know that the decision to use you as an unwitting asset was made above my level. If I had been consulted, I would have insisted on providing your family with protection before any operation began." Agent Chen consulted his notes before continuing. "The good news is that the operation was successful beyond our expectations. The 8 operatives we captured represent nearly the entire remaining network in this region. Their communications equipment has provided us with intelligence about similar networks in other parts of the country." "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "My family has been through a traumatic experience. Our home has been violated, and we've been living a lie for weeks without knowing it." Agent Martinez exchanged glances with her colleagues before responding. "We're prepared to offer your family several options. You can return to your normal life with enhanced security measures and regular check-ins with our personnel. We can arrange for relocation to a new area with new identities if you prefer. Or, if you're interested, we have a position available that would allow you to use your skills and experience in service of operations like this one." The offer hung in the air as Marcus considered his options. His old life, the quiet suburban existence he'd been building with Sarah and Emma, had been irrevocably changed by forces beyond his control. But he also understood that his actions during the crisis had prevented a much larger disaster and had helped neutralize a genuine threat to national security. "I need to discuss this with my wife," Marcus said finally. "She's been through as much as I have, and any decision about our future has to be made together." "Of course," Colonel Harrison agreed. "Take all the time you need. In the meantime, we'll maintain security for your family and begin the process of determining how much of this situation can be made public." As the debriefing continued, Marcus learned more about the scope of the operation that had targeted his family. The spy network had been operating for over a decade, with agents embedded in various industries and government positions. The documents discovered in Afghanistan had been the first major breakthrough in identifying and tracking these operatives. The captured operatives had revealed under interrogation that they had been monitoring Marcus and his family for 3 weeks, learning their routines and identifying the best time to strike. They had chosen a Tuesday evening because Marcus typically worked late at the hardware store, giving them time to search the house and interrogate Sarah before he arrived home. They made one crucial mistake, Agent Chen observed. They underestimated your combat readiness and your ability to adapt to a threat situation in a civilian environment. Most soldiers struggle with the transition from military to civilian mindset, but you were able to switch back to tactical mode when your family was threatened. Marcus nodded, understanding that his military training had been the deciding factor in protecting his family. But he also recognized that luck had played a role. If he had arrived home even 15 minutes later, the situation could have ended very differently. The meeting concluded with arrangements for Marcus to return to the safe house where Sarah and Emma were waiting. He would have 48 hours to discuss the options with his family before making any decisions about their future. As he prepared to leave, Colonel Harrison pulled him aside for a private conversation. "Marcus, I want you to know that what happened to your family was wrong. Regardless of the positive outcome for national security, you and Sarah and Emma deserved to know that you were being used as part of an operation, and you deserved protection from the beginning. I appreciate that, sir, but what's done is done. The question now is how we move forward. If you decide to accept the position we're offering, you'd be working with a joint task force that handles situations like this one. Your experience in both military operations and civilian integration would be valuable, and you'd be helping to protect other families from going through what yours has endured." Marcus considered the offer as he was driven to the safe house. The idea of returning to active duty, even in a different capacity, was both appealing and concerning. He missed the sense of purpose that military service had provided, but he also valued the peaceful life he'd been building with his family in Ohio. The safe house turned out to be a comfortable ranch-style home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, indistinguishable from thousands of other middle-class residences except for the armed guards who were discreetly positioned around the perimeter. Sarah and Emma were waiting for him in the living room, both looking tired but relieved to see him. Emma ran to him immediately, wrapping her arms around his waist and refusing to let go. "Daddy, are the bad men all gone now?" "Yes, sweetheart, they're all gone. You and Mommy are safe now, and we're going to figure out what comes next together." Sarah looked at him with eyes that held a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and uncertainty. "How bad is it? What aren't you telling me?" Marcus sat down beside her and took her hand, choosing his words carefully. "It's complicated, but the most important thing is that we're all safe, and the people who threatened us have been captured. The government is offering us some choices about what happens next." Over the next several hours, Marcus explained everything he had learned during the debriefing, being careful to present the information in a way that Emma could understand without being frightened. Sarah listened with the same composure she had shown during the crisis, asking thoughtful questions and processing the implications of their situation. 6 months later, Marcus stood in a state-of-the-art training facility in Virginia, watching a group of military spouses practice defensive tactics that Sarah had helped develop. The program had grown beyond anything they had initially imagined, with families from all branches of the military participating in comprehensive security awareness training. Emma had adapted to their new life with the resilience that children often display in the face of change. She attended a school on the secure facility that specialized in educating the children of military and intelligence personnel, and she had made friends with other kids whose families understood the unique challenges of their lifestyle. Most importantly, she had received counseling that helped her process the traumatic events of that September evening, and she no longer woke up with nightmares about the bad men in their house. Sarah had thrown herself into developing training curricula with the same determination she had shown during the crisis. Her programs taught military families how to recognize surveillance, how to secure their homes, and how to respond effectively to various threat scenarios. But more than that, she had created a support network for families who had been targeted or threatened, providing them with both practical skills and emotional support. "The Martinez family from the Nebraska incident has completed their training," Sarah reported to Marcus as they reviewed the week's activities. "Mrs. Martinez showed remarkable improvement in situational awareness, and their teenage son has decided he wants to pursue a career in cybersecurity after learning about the digital threats that families face." Marcus smiled, remembering his own family's journey from victims to active participants in protecting others. "How many families have we trained now?" 237 families directly, but the ripple effect is much larger. The families we've trained are teaching others in their communities, and the military has incorporated modified versions of our programs into standard family readiness group activities. The work was challenging but rewarding in ways that Marcus had never experienced during his traditional military service. Instead of engaging enemies overseas, he was protecting American families on American soil. Instead of following orders, without question, he was helping to develop strategies and policies that would shape how the military protected its own people. Director Reynolds approached them with a folder containing their next assignment. We've identified another potential network operating in the Pacific Northwest. The pattern is similar to what you encountered with targeting of former special operations personnel who were involved in sensitive missions overseas. How many families are at risk? Sarah asked, already shifting into planning mode. At least 12 that we've identified, possibly more. We want you to lead the protective operation, but this time with full advance coordination and family consent. No one gets used as unknowing bait. Marcus reviewed the intelligence briefing, noting the professional presentation and comprehensive planning that had become standard for their operations. The lessons learned from his family's experience had resulted in completely new protocols for protecting military families from foreign threats. Timeline, he asked. The operation begins in 2 weeks. We'll establish a family protection center in Seattle, and you'll oversee both the security operations and the family support services. Emma can continue her schooling remotely, and we've arranged for her to participate in a summer program for gifted children at the University of Washington. The integration of family considerations into operational planning was something Marcus had insisted upon from the beginning. Emma's education and well-being were never treated as secondary concerns, but rather as integral parts of maintaining the operational effectiveness of her parents. That evening, as they sat in their comfortable quarters on the Virginia facility, Marcus and Sarah reflected on how much their lives had changed since that September day when foreign operatives had invaded their home. Emma was reading in her room, her homework completed and her evening routine as normal as any other child's despite the extraordinary circumstances of their life. "Do you ever miss the simplicity of our old life?" Sarah asked, curled up beside Marcus on their couch. "Sometimes," Marcus admitted, "but I don't miss feeling useless. When I was working at the hardware store, I felt like I was wasting the skills and experience I'd gained in the military. This work gives me a sense of purpose that I'd been missing. And I don't miss feeling helpless," Sarah added. "When those men were in our house, I realized how unprepared I was despite all the basic training you'd given me. Now I know that I can protect our family, and I'm helping other women learn to protect theirs." Emma appeared in the doorway, holding her favorite stuffed animal and wearing pajamas decorated with cartoon superheroes. "Mommy, Daddy, can I tell you something?" "Of course, sweetheart," Sarah said, making room for Emma between them on the couch. "I know what happened to us was scary, and I know that your job now is to help other families so the same scary thing doesn't happen to them. I want you to know that I'm proud of you for helping people, and I'm not afraid anymore because I know you'll always protect me." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion as he hugged his daughter. The wisdom and maturity she had developed through their shared ordeal continued to amaze him, and her resilience gave him hope for the future. "Emma, do you understand why we can't tell your friends at your old school about what we do now?" Sarah asked gently. "Because it's a secret that keeps people safe, just like how superheroes have secret identities to protect the people they love." Emma replied matter-of-factly. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Marcus stood outside their quarters looking up at the stars. The Virginia sky was clearer than it had been in Ohio, and he could see constellations that reminded him of nights in Afghanistan when he had wondered what his future would hold after military service. Sarah joined him, wrapping a blanket around both of their shoulders. "Any regrets?" she asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. Their life was more complicated now, with responsibilities and risks that most civilian families never faced. But it was also more meaningful, with a clear sense of mission that aligned with their values and utilized their unique experiences. "No regrets," he said finally. "We didn't choose this path, but we've made it our own. We're protecting our family while helping to protect others, and Emma is growing up understanding that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're called upon to serve." The next morning would bring new challenges and new families to protect. But tonight, Marcus Thompson felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that his military training, his family's strength, and their shared commitment to service had transformed them from victims into guardians. The danger that had once threatened to destroy their peaceful life had instead led them to a greater purpose, one that honored both their personal values and their duty to others who faced similar threats. Their story had begun with sensing danger and rushing to protect what mattered most. It had evolved into something larger, a mission to ensure that other families would never have to face such dangers alone or unprepared. In the end, the very skills that had saved them had become the foundation for saving others, turning their personal trauma into a source of strength and protection for the military community they served.